Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows come the best indie podcasts.
Witchcraft, the occult, extremist beliefs, murder. Tune in to Rogue Darkness each Friday and join host Raven as I uncover horrific crimes committed under the misconceptions and misunderstandings of witchcraft and other belief systems. I'll cover a wide range of crimes involving ritualistic killings and extremist beliefs to cult persuasion and supposed possession. Anything and everything that borders the line of horrifying. There's always 3 sides to a story. Side A, Side B, and then the truth. Let's uncover the truth together and explore the darkness of mankind, one crime at a time. Available wherever you get your podcast fix, simply by searching Rogue Darkness.
Hey, this is a true crime show. Say what? Yup. And my language can get pretty colorful at times. If that offends you, sorry about it. I'm just living my truth. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors, and welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your animal-loving host, CJ. Y'all know where to find me on the socials by now, and I'll leave a link to my Patreon account in the show notes. Should you like to sign up and get ad-free, early release episodes, and an extra exclusive episode at the end of every month. Oh, and a unicorn name for you at the Seabreeze Studios stables. I have to say, I am so freaking pissed off about the pre-autopsy notice that came out last week about Nex Benedict. Suicide. Say the fuck what? Unfortunately, it seems like whoever leaked this information to the media about Nex's autopsy didn't include anything about the multiple contusions to Nex's head. It all reeks of a cover-up for sure. But the official autopsy for Nex is supposed to come out March 27th, so I'm trying not to get too worked up until then. But I will say, I have a secret account on Twitter, and I've been watching this asshole superintendent of schools in Oklahoma, Ryan Walters, with this account. This guy has the gall to continue attacking the LGBTQ community. And when he isn't, he's attacking Biden and Kamala Harris. It's a classic case of, oh, I need to take the pressure off myself, so look over there. He is seriously pathetic and should not be working anywhere the welfare of children is concerned. I had a nice little chat with listeners Matthew and Jamie regarding this knee-jerk autopsy that came out for Nex recently, and it certainly has left me flabbergasted. It's a great word. I think we really need to bring it back. But again, I'm trying to contain myself until the official report comes out. And if it's the same results, I certainly hope Nex's family gets a private autopsy conducted, which by the time this episode is out, they might already have. Our missing but not forgotten LGBTQ person this episode is Martin Seyyfert. Martin is either a trans boy or a gender non-conforming person from Duncanville, Texas. They've been missing since January 30th, 2024. Martin stands 5'7", weighs about 115 pounds, has short ginger-colored hair, and hazel-colored eyes. Martin is 17 years old and might be hanging out with online friends in Avondale, which I believe Avondale is in Arizona. This disappearance is a little frustrating because it's not been stated the circumstances as to why Martin left their home. I mean, Martin is almost an adult age, and if they're struggling to live their truth in their home, I don't want to harm them more by announcing them missing here. But if my child ever went missing, I would want to find her immediately, knowing that we could talk through whatever pushed her away. Since I have no way of knowing what's going on in Martin's life and Martin is still considered a minor, I'm taking chances that Martin wasn't in a hostile situation by saying, should you see them, or know of their whereabouts, please call the Duncanville Police Department in Texas at 1-972-223-6111. Okay, let's get into this episode's main case, which is a little older, 23 years ago actually, but the crimes of the perpetrators was probably going on for 30 years prior to that. You may have heard of Valley of the Kings before. It's where nearly all the famous Egyptian pharaohs and noblemen are buried. But that's not the Valley of the Kings that we'll be covering in this episode. The Valley of the Kings that I'd like to share with you is a so-called religious group that called themselves Valley of the Kings. This Valley of the Kings, not in Egypt, is in Lawrence County, Mississippi. Lawrence County, Mississippi has been home to plenty of Ku Klux Klansmen over the years, if that gives you any insight into what kind of ass-backward place we're going to be talking about. In this county lies a small town called Jayess. Population is about 13,000 people. A man named David Earl King, he was a reverend, owned 58 acres near the town of Jayess that he purchased in the mid-1970s. Reverend King turned the acreage into a compound of sorts. The Reverend also had a 32-year-old man who lived there with him, and he was believed to be the Reverend's adopted son. This adopted son took Reverend King's last name also. So the adopted son is Nathan Paul King, but previously he was Nathan Paul Dooley. He'll come up in our story a little bit later. But for now, I'll just say that Nathan was on board with whatever Reverend King did in his compound. Along with Nathan, Reverend King's wife and 10 or 11 other children, presumably his, also resided with them. When I think of a compound, I always think of cults. And I'll tell you, warriors, I believe Valley of the Kings was just that. Picture 58 acres with a large home on it and a bunch of mobile homes, kind of like a mobile home park around this big house. Then there's a church. In the church was a basement that doubled as a school for the children living on the compound. The rest of the compound had ranch-type animals such as horses, cows, chickens, etc. And then the rest of the acreage was a lot of empty land with some trees and brush surrounding the main living areas for people and animals. Reverend King had even purchased the road that was going into his compound, all the better to keep everything discreet and from prying eyes. So using his last name, Reverend David King named his property Valley of the Kings. Isn't that cute? He had about 35 other non-related people, men, women, and children living in his compound by 2001. But those folks who lived on the premises were not the only ones to attend church services. They weren't even the only ones to have their children attend Valley of the Kings school. Some of the parishioners were from surrounding land in Mississippi, and of course the town of Jayess. There were even some from Louisiana. This self-proclaimed non-denominational church was operating for nearly 30 years on the property. I have to be truthful with you about something. I've always thought that non-denominational meant a church that accepted all walks of life, and it was inclusive to everyone. I'm wrong. It means that they follow some form of Christianity, but are not specific to just one, like Protestants, Catholics, Methodists, or Baptists. Non-denominational churches take a unique approach to Christianity, and they're often established by a single pastor or a community. So I guess that means they're sanctioned to follow the same rules set forth for bigger churches. But since Valley of the Kings was a fundamentalist church, that meant they sent their own rules and pretty much interpreted the Bible however the hell they wanted to. For 30 years on the King's property, this Valley of the Kings church was in operation, and so was the school for children. It also functioned as a prime hunting ground for pedophiles, grown men with a desire for young boys. Freshly turned 14-year-old Nathaniel Lamb lived with his family in Jayess. The Lamb family was part of the Valley of the King's church that did not live on the compound property. Nathaniel, with brownish blonde hair and glasses to correct his vision, was raised simply, while other teenagers everywhere were watching television and playing video games. These were not an indulgence Nathaniel was able to take part of. He didn't have access at his fingertips to the internet, not to the news or shows that might give him safety survival skills. He knew right from wrong, but his main knowledge was what he learned from Valley of the Kings and Reverend King himself. One evening during the last week of February 2001, a phone call was made to the Lamb family home. The phone call warned them that an angry mob with guns would be coming to their home to kill them all. This threat was not taken lightly by the Lambs. After the call, the father gathered the family around. They locked the doors, checked the windows, turned out the lights, and they reassembled to pray to God to keep them safe. Just days prior, Nathaniel's mother saw how differently he was behaving. She was able to wrangle out of him, amidst his shame and guilt, that he had been sexually molested and raped by a few men at the church, one of them being Reverend King. The other men were the Reverend's adopted son, Nathan Paul King, and another man named Gary Bates, a 21-year-old vagrant from Denham Springs, Louisiana. Nathaniel's mom quickly took him to the police station to tell his story and file a report. Since the churchgoers of Valley of the Kings refused to believe such blasphemy about their man of God, they were going to set out to silence the child and his family just for starting such rumors. Ironically, Nathaniel's mother, Darlene, had moved with her family when she was just 10 years old from Florida to Mississippi, just to be part of Reverend King's first church in Baxterville, Mississippi in 1971. Darlene's family had been sucked into King's ministries as so many others had been over the years. After all, Reverend King was charismatic, and he gave such uplifting sermons. But here in 2001, before the angry mob could attack the Lamb family, police were at the Valley of the Kings compound arresting the Reverend, Nathan King, and Gary Bates for a series of sexual assault charges arising from homosexual misconduct on March 1, 2001. When police searched the premises of Valley of the Kings, in particular the Reverend's bedroom, they found a gay porn material, sex lotions, and adult toys. Everything Nathaniel had described to the police when his mom made him go to the station to file the report. Nathaniel also told the police about the threats that the 66-year-old Reverend had made to him. Reverend King threatened to castrate Nathaniel with a device used on livestock if he ever told anyone. How scary and confusing this must have been for the young teenager who believed that this man would protect him. This man would take care of him. He was someone with authority to respect. He was a man of God and a beloved Reverend his mother had known since she was a child. Oh, the brainwashing churches like this can do. $100,000 in cash was also found and several weapons. Truth of the matter was, David Earl King was a predator. He hid behind his titles, not just the one of Reverend, but as a heterosexual man, a family man, a Christian man. Sexual assaults of the children in his congregation were not his only abuse of power. Reverend King would send the children out, all the children, boys and girls, and even some of the adults to sell peanut brittle for the church. He would load up each child with about $70 worth of candy. That's a heavy load for anyone to lug around, but especially for a child. Then they would have to go door to door selling it. If they did not reach their quota of bringing back at least $40 from their sales, then they would be beaten by the Reverend or their parents for shaming the family. Tell me this isn't a cult. The money wasn't used for the betterment of the church, but rather the Reverend squirreled half of it away in a bank and the other half under the stairs of his house. After the arrests of the Reverend, his adopted son Nathan, and Louisiana man Gary, the three were all denied bail because they were considered flight risks. When the three men were in custody, an 11-year-old boy came forward with allegations of Nathan King trying to molest him, and 8 other potential victims of sex crimes committed by Reverend King and other members of his congregation also came forward. These victims were from Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and some of the claims even dated back decades prior to 2001. One of the claims was from a Louisiana boy whose mother sent him to school at Valley of the King's Church in Mississippi. That boy, Reverend King, refused to return home to his mother. 2 other boys claimed the same thing happened to them while in Reverend King's care, but later they recanted their stories, although the boys were removed from the Reverend's custody. At trial, the 3 men were charged with acts of oral sex and anal sex with Nathaniel Lamb. All 3 men claimed not guilty. All 3 men were found guilty for their crimes. Reverend King was sentenced to a total of 36 years of incarceration and a fine of $16,000. His adopted son Nathan was sentenced to the same. I couldn't find out what the 21-year-old Louisiana man Gary Bates was sentenced to, but it was probably something similar. Both the Reverend and Nathan King appealed their cases, but to no avail, and the good old Reverend would only live through about half of his sentence. He died in prison at the age of 83. His adopted son Nathan was granted to be a prison trustee for his good behavior. A trustee is a prisoner who gets perks and some power, privileges. After the court learned of his trustee position that he'd been in for 10 years already, they revoked it, claiming that Nathan was ineligible. And that's how my friend Karma works. She's a bitch, but you gotta love her. He is still presumably serving out his sentence in a Mississippi prison, with 0 perks. Our True Crime Quickie comes to us from the Don't Say Gay state of Florida, Tampa, Florida. It all happened on February 2nd of this year, 2024. I usually don't like to cover these cases so soon after they happen because there's no resolution yet, but it's a story that needs to be shared nonetheless. For many, an everyday occurrence might be a trip to the grocery store, or driving to work, or even just taking your dog to the dog park for some socialization and play for your furry friend. The latter option was pretty much a daily occurrence for 52-year-old John Walter Lay. John Walter Lay affectionately went by Walt. Walt would take his black lab Fala to the West Dog Park in the Egypt Lake Lido area nearly every single day. There he could unleash his pretty little fur baby and let her run freely to exercise with other dogs. Walt had been taking Fala here for years, and both he and Fala had made quite a few good friends from it. Walt was a proud gay man, and he was never apologetic for living his truth, which he shouldn't have been. But every state, every city, every town is going to have hateful people. One of the hatefuls in Tampa is 65-year-old Gerald Declan Radford, who, if I might be judgy for a moment, looks like he's 85 instead of 65. It's probably just all the anger in his heart making him look older. But anyway, Gerald would take his dog to the dog park frequently as well. And when he saw Walt there, knowing Walt's sexual identity, he would normally yell homophobic slurs at Walt and try to intimidate him. Walt was the peaceful type, and he would simply tell Gerald to leave him alone, and then Walt would walk away. On the evening of February 1st, Walt sent a video of himself regarding an incident that happened between him and Gerald that morning. He sent this video to his friend and told his friend,
"Gerald ran up to me and started screaming at me. And when I told him to leave me alone and tried to walk away, he yelled at me, 'You're gonna die.'"
The following morning, Walt took Fala to the dog park to run. There was no one else at the park, And then Gerald showed up. And Gerald was armed with a gun. He shot Walt. Not long later, someone else came to the park. They saw Walt and they called the police. When a deputy showed up, they tried to save him, but Walt was pronounced dead at the hospital. Police found Gerald and they arrested him. He admitted to shooting Walt, but he claimed it was self-defense. He said that he and Walt got into a scuffle and he shot him. That, I'm sorry, just doesn't fly for me. Who the fuck takes a gun to a dog park, first of all? Second of all, a scuffle is one thing. And if you want to use your fists for weapons, so be it. With a fist fight, there's always a good chance both parties will survive it. But Walt always tried to walk away from any confrontation with Gerald, knowing that something wasn't right in that bully's head. And third, Gerald had threatened Walt's life just the morning before. This sounds an awful lot like premeditation to me. Gerald has since been charged with second-degree murder with possible hate crime enhancements, since he liked to scream gay slurs that had been witnessed by others. Now, surprisingly, the Don't Say Gay state does have some hate crime laws, but only if it can be proven the perpetrator has prejudice against a victim. Here's where I'm having a problem with this case, though. Come on, Florida, second-degree murder? It's obvious from the video Walt sent to his friend. Gerald had threatened murdering Walt just the day before. That is most definitely premeditation. This makes me wonder if the prosecution thinks they can't prove Gerald made a threat. You have it on video, folks. Florida does have a stand your ground law, which means you can use deadly force to protect yourself. And I'm sure if Walt knew Gerald was bringing a gun to the dog park, he would have went elsewhere and avoided Gerald altogether. I'll try to keep an ear out on what goes on with Gerald's trial. Hopefully there'll be some unicorn justice for Walt. Rest in power, Walt. Hey, if you're in the Denver, Colorado area, or you would like a mini vacation in Denver this July 12th through the 14th, I'll be there at the True Crime Paranormal Festival. There's a great lineup of true crime podcasts, advocacy groups, and paranormal podcasts that'll be there too, including at least 6 from the Darkcast Network. Come rub elbows with me, Autumn from Autumn's Oddities, Gina and Amber from Weird True Crime, Tiffany from True Crime Connections, Danica and Shannon from Murder and Mimosas, Scarlett and Michelle from Missing Magnolias, and possibly more Darkcast shows as we get closer to the date. It's going to be a blast! This will be my 3rd True Crime Festival that I'm attending, and they're just so much fun. I've only been to the Denver airport, so I really look forward to cruising around the city of Denver this time. I really wish I would have rented a car at the Austin location last year. I gotta get back to Austin someday and check out the sights. There's so many places in the U.S. that I want to visit, and there's some I want to go back to again, like Austin and Seattle. Anyway, I'll leave a link to the True Crime Paranormal Festival website in my show notes. You can get your tickets there. And if you're a podcaster, I think they're still accepting shows, too. I love you, Rainbow Warriors. You matter. And remember, it's not a crime to live your truth, unless you're a murderer.